Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marcella Paris, and as the director of the Lewiston Public Library, I'd like to welcome you to today's Great Falls Forum. The forum is a monthly speaker series featuring leaders in the areas of business, public policy, academia, and the arts, and is a partnership of Bates College, the Sun Journal, and the Lewiston Public Library. This is the 24th season of the program, so we thank you for your ongoing support. A recording of today's program will be available starting tomorrow on the library's YouTube page, but also on Facebook shortly after the program. Please visit lplonline.org for more information. And also please mark your calendars for the next Great Falls Forum, which will be taking place on Thursday, February 17th at 12 noon, featuring Bates College professor Stephanie Kelly Romano with a talk entitled Conspiracy Theories, Why, How, and What to Do. More information is now available at lplonline.org. And a little housekeeping for today's program. So those on Zoom will see a Q&A option at the bottom of the screen. Use this to enter any questions for our speakers today, and they will answer towards the end of the program. And for those joining us on Facebook Live, you can go ahead and type your questions in the comment box there, and we will make sure that they get to the speakers. So now today, I have the pleasure to introduce the moderator and a participant on today's panel, Beckie Conrad. Rebecca Swanson Conrad owns RSC Consulting, a firm that assists businesses and organizations seeking to align mission to outcomes, develop new projects, or scale to new market positions. Previously, she served as president and CEO of the Lewiston Auburn Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, where she led the acquisition of the Lewiston Auburn Economic Growth Council. She joined the chamber following a career in higher education administration, first at Bates College, and then as vice president for institutional advancement at Maine College of Art and Design. With her husband, she founded and owned two small Maine businesses. She had a gubernatorial appointment to the Maine Arts Commission as vice chair, and she currently serves with Oxfam's Sisters on the Planet, a diverse group of American women using their influence to fight global poverty, hunger, and injustice, with a particular focus on empowering women and girls worldwide. She is also vice chair of the University of Southern Maine's Board of Visitors and a member of the Muskie Schools Board of Visitors, and serves on the Maine Business Immigration Coalition and Community Health Options Boards. Conrad received her BA in English from Bates College and studied at the New England Studies program at the University of Southern Maine. She lives in Auburn with her husband, Austin, and cat, Charles Mingus. So to introduce today's program and our other panelists, I'm pleased to welcome Beckie Conrad to the Great Falls Forum. Hello.
Hi, thank you, Marcella, and hello, everyone. I'm so glad we're able to do this even amidst COVID, and we have Zoom as our resource. Thrilled to be here today, and thank you for that wonderful introduction, Marcella. It's really, in many ways, testament to my experience here in Lewiston Auburn that I've been afforded all of those opportunities. Coming here as a Bates student opened a lot of doors for me, and I'm very pleased that I've been able to stay and be part of this great community. So today I'm going to introduce two wonderful panelists who are going to join me in a conversation about public art in general, and specifically public art in the Lewiston Auburn region, as we are developing a very significant collection very quickly and working toward policy decisions to make sure we can continue this for the long term. The two panelists will introduce themselves, and then I will give an overview of our timeline and how we've come to this point. And then we're going to have a discussion regarding some of their experiences here, and then certainly, I hope, open it up to a lot of good questions from the audience. So first, I'd like to introduce Andy Rosen and to have him tell us some about his experience as an artist. Andy?
Hi.
Hi, Andy.
Hi. I'm Andy Rosen. I am not technically a native, but I'm pretty close. I grew up in Auburn, and I think a lot of my upbringing was pretty formative for my art making. I'm an art professor and a working artist, and I see those things as really interconnected. In terms of the work that I make, a lot of it is about the natural environment, about my own understanding of the relationship to the natural environment, and also it's often in public spaces, and sometimes those spaces, I think the ones that I gravitate towards are like derelict spaces or places where the wild has kind of like crept back in. And so oftentimes I'm exploring those spaces on my own and then sort of envision something happening there. And that envisioning is usually, I think the easiest way to describe it often is a kind of like diorama-esque, like set piece like thing where I create an animal or I create a scene or something like that to fill out that vision. But I think what the other thing I'm really doing is like, I'm really interested in the way in which we use spaces. And I say that, I think my upbringing was really influential for that. Like I was given a lot of freedom to just sort of roam through Auburn, explore like old foundations of buildings that had sort of fallen in the woods or something like that, or the sand pits. I went everywhere on my bike and then later on my skateboard. And I think that experience of just sort of having some sense of agency in the world, also with tools, I was given like a big sort of open toolbox sort of experience where I could just like have at the tool cabinet in the basement at my own house. It allowed me to sort of have some agency with both building things and going places. And I think the skateboarding also, it strangely, in looking back, like was a really influential thing. It allowed me to like look at a street or a sort of alleyway or a curb even and think about it in a creative manner. And I think I approached the idea of public spaces in that same way.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Andy. And folks in town know that they can visit two of Andy's installations here in Lewiston Auburn. Looms, which is over in the Bates Mill complex near Da Vinci's restaurant, and then Ledger's, which is next to the Baxter Brewing restaurant and pub in the canal system. So we're watching those develop into the landscape, and hopefully folks are out enjoying them. Next, I'd like to introduce Hugh Lassen, who's joining us from Cherryfield, Maine. Hi, Hugh.
Good afternoon. I'm here. I'm definitely not a native. I was born in Scotland and came to Maine through a convoluted channel. I studied, I went to Brown University, was chafing a little bit at the academic environment, studied at RISD a little bit, sculpture, eventually ended up in New York and had a sculpture teacher that said, if I wanted to be a stone sculptor, I first needed to study the figure drawing because stone is such a slow medium. So he set me to drawing the figure for a couple of years. I ended up studying at the Art Students League in New York in the basement with the hammer and chisel in the old fashioned way. Started gaining weight by making sculptures and having them on my windowsill in Jersey City. Met my future wife, decided it was time to leave the city. And I was fortunate that she decided to marry me. We went up to down East Maine and just kept going east until we could afford a piece of land and ended up in Cherryfield, which is a little bit back and beyond on a 7-acre blueberry field, not knowing anything about blueberries, but thinking that having a small organic blueberry field that was very intense during the summer might be conducive to some winter studio time where I could do my sculpture. So that was the dream, the 29-year-old dream. There's been a lot of bumps along the way, but we're still doing that. And most of my work is based on that experience, learning to draw the figure, and my further experiences basically being outside a lot and having a small fruit farm and trying to make explorations into natural form and taking those ideas and trying to translate them directly into stone. And that is sort of the essence of what I'm working on right now. I really enjoy the process of carving stone, and I've really enjoyed growing a little bit in scale as my kids have gotten older, and I've got plenty of space up here and no one cares if I run grinders early in the morning. So I'm thrilled to be on this forum and look forward to talking to everybody.
Thank you so much, Hugh. And just to really, kind of think about what we just heard, two working artists, the references to education, to taking risks, to the place and the community, and the influences that artists have, especially public artists. We're going to talk a little bit about that today, but I think it's interesting to hear two different journeys, and one from someone who is from Auburn and another who chose Maine as their home state, both of whom have chosen our community where they're going to continue to do significant work, which we'll talk about. And Hugh has two pieces currently in progress in Lewiston, Auburn. One is Bud Form, which is installed over at the entrance to the bridge in downtown Auburn near Great Falls Plaza. And then he has a second piece coming online in 2022 as part of the Choice Neighborhood Grant in downtown Lewiston. So we are very pleased to have two folks with us today who not only are working, I believe, both nationally and as well as within Maine, but also have chosen our community to put some significant work. So let me just give folks a little context about how today's topic came about. We know that public art is something Lewiston and Auburn have embraced for years. We have Civil War statues, and of course, public art goes back to the 1800s, in our probably even longer than that, but we know documented community development around public art goes way back in history. And we also currently know we have a lot of very specific neighborhood pieces, murals and sidewalk art and crosswalk art. And our community is very creative, and we are thrilled that we have this very strong inventory of wonderful pieces in our area. We have a set of Bates interns do a mapping of that. And if you'd like to see all of the pieces currently installed, you can visit LA Art's website as well as the two cities, and you can find an interactive map that we're going to utilize quite a lot in the spring to do some walking tours and get folks out and enjoying these many installations. And briefly, just to bring us to today and today's talk, in 2015, LA Arts, the two cities, and Arts and Culture LA were granted a Maine Arts Commission grant to do a cultural plan. And that cultural plan had some strategies in it around economic development, including tourism. And in 2019, while I was at the chamber, I partnered with LA Arts for us to go for the second round of the Maine Arts Commission funding, a $75,000 investment in what they call Creative Communities Equal Economic Development, CCED. And we set out to prove that that's true. And I think today you're going to hear that we are meeting some of the grant criteria. We were funded to install two pieces, one of which is ledgers and one of which is Bud Form, so Andy's work and Hugh's work, and also to create a policy for the communities to further public art. And that plan was adopted by each city council in December of 19, is now in the process of being updated, really thoughtfully extended to make sure that it includes many of the experiences we've had in installing significant work. And so the city councils will be looking at a new policy sometime in 2022. The important part of this, I think, is to understand how public art evolves in a community and why we do the work. Many visual arts organizations are doing all kinds of work, and public art is something that truly puts public in the word in the equation. Private developers, private landowners can do things. If sign ordinances sometimes impact something like a mural, but in general, a private piece of property, a business can put things around their business to talk about the arts or celebrate the arts, but the public space has a different approach. And so today we're going to ask our panelists the first question. When you thought about public art in Lewiston, Auburn, why were you interested in working here? I'll let either person start. You? No? Okay.
I'm happy to go.
Okay.
Okay. I think that for me, it's like, I left grad school. I went to the University of Iowa for grad school, actually in painting. And then there was a circuitous route to get me to sculpture, but I moved back to Maine. I wanted to be, I think, more tied in a way that felt tangible to my community. And I think my most immediate community, the one that I grew up with and felt very influenced by, is LA, is Lewiston Auburn. And the spaces in Lewiston Auburn are also sort of fascinating to me. The mill spaces in particular, the canals, the way in which, I mean, if you're from Lewiston Auburn, like there's a lot about work that is about Lewiston Auburn. Like the biggest buildings were the mills. And I think that to me was like just a kind of thing to be thinking about: work in relationship to one's life, my own livelihood, and then my upbringing, and then the making of ledgers in particular. 7 Foxes made out of brick, that is from a brick clay factory, Morin Brick in Auburn, which they get their brick from the landscape, they like from an old riverbed, like and that the mills themselves were also made from brick, became like a really, I don't know, circular, but interestingly circular idea for me. And so to see that as a way to think about using a sort of classically utilitarian material, brick, and then be thinking about using it in a way that was, I guess, more expressive or pointing to something else.
Great. So Hugh, Andy has deep roots in the community, so he had a lot of knowledge. He's talked about literally visiting spaces where he could envision public art that was on public property or public facing property. How was your experience? And what was your first introduction to us, and what made you answer that RFP that brought us Bud Form?
Well, for me, I've done a certain amount of work that's smaller in scale, that's gone more to collectors. So you're trying to please 1 or 2 people that hopefully fall for your work and are willing to pay for it and have it shipped and installed. And it's wonderful, and we all need to pay the bills, and it really helps. But the higher mountain really is public art, because you're putting your work in front of people that don't necessarily want it in front of them, and that's exciting because you're kind of putting your work on a public stage rather than in a private sort of gallery setting. And so it's a desire to have your work in amongst, have an economic reason to have your work, so people are having to navigate around it and have a response to it is fascinating for me. And as I've been working with stone, I've been working with the hard, granite, harder stones, and they do lend themselves to being outside. So I was excited to see the Lewiston Auburn RFP go out, because it felt very much like you guys were willing to take a risk. And as sculptors, we're sort of always the ones taking a good part of the risk by putting our work out there and hoping that it will get taken up. But the way the RFP was worded, it was a new thing. It felt like you guys were on a new chapter, and you were willing to take a risk and maybe push the boat out and not do something safe. And so that was exciting. As to the actual siting, I'm not from Auburn, so for me, that's where the collaboration begins. I will propose something, and then people that know the city better will sort of move it around virtually till they find out where they think it should be. And I have a fairly hands-off approach. I was thrilled with the site that we ended up choosing, but that's more out of my hands, I'd say. So
Great. Andy?
I was just thinking, like, my approach is kind of from the opposite direction, and that, like, it's similarly interested in the public, though. Like, I think the other thing is, as a teacher, I'm always I like have these voices of, I don't know what, made up people in my head of from Auburn and Lewiston, but like about the value or the function of art. And so that's always in the back of my mind, that I'm kind of having these conversations imagined, but then the public forum allows them to be real about, like, what is the function of art? What's it? Why in this location? Why does it look this way? Even sort of minute things, or things that feel minute, about like a level of realism or something like that. Like, that doesn't look like exactly a fox, for example, or something like that. Like, why? And so those questions are there in the work. And I think specifically, the location becomes an interesting point for me. That's kind of like, that's where I start, and then I sort of build out from there. I don't know, I just think it's interesting in the way in which it starts from a different direction than Hughes, you know?
That's great. Good. Well, those, Hugh led me to a segue, and Andy, I think you've helped get us there, that you both did come to our community. Certainly Hugh had not worked with us. Andy, you knew us individually as folks, but you had never really spent a lot of time with us around public art installations. Right. And we know, and literally it takes a village to build all this. So I'd love to have you walk through your experience. And I happened to be on the public art working group that was able to look at the proposals, but we know that even from the proposal stage, there was a lot of interaction and a lot of questions. So Hugh, do you want to start and share, because we did change locations, could you share some insight into your experience? And this is meant to be a learning session as well, so I'd love to even hear, you know, where we can listen more carefully, where we can really kind of become more practiced at installing public art. But including the crane, please tell us about your experience.
Yeah, so we initially had talked about having it in the anniversary park there along the river. And so I was imagining a very large open space around the sculpture. And so I had wanted to have a larger sculpture that would work, you know, with the open air and the trees and the grass. And so that was exciting to propose a larger sculpture than I'd ever made before. And so just to back up a little bit, so we have this blueberry farm, which is very bouldery, and I've carved some of the boulders in the blueberry field, and I've given up carving boulders because they have cracks and problems. So with the Auburn piece, I went to a big stone yard in mid-Maine to look at what they had available. Found a nice block of dark granite, and I asked the yard guy if I could put $100 on it just so that he wouldn't use it. And he said, "Oh, don't worry about it. You're fine, whatever, no problem." And I thought, well, maybe that's good because I might not get the commission. And so a month later, thankfully got the commission, went back, different yard guy, been cut up into steps. And it was a nice big piece. And I had been talking to Mayor Levesque about how a little Joey could sit in the sculpture and this was going to be great. And now they'd cut it out. They had no other dark stones. And the guy said to me, "Hey, if you'd put $100 on it, we could have kept that aside." It was a different yard guy. Anyway, so this is my internal challenges. So then I had to find out where the stone came from. It actually came from Quebec and ended up calling the quarry up in Quebec. Called my buddy John, who has a semi, asked him if he would go up to Quebec to pick up a 10-ton block of granite. After about a minute of industrial language, I said, "I take that as a no, John." And so eventually, one way or another, we got the stone down here, and I was trying to pretend that everything was fine to Beckie, that everything was running along smoothly, but I was pedaling pretty hard to just deliver on the commission that I had proposed to the council members, and sort of changing my process in order to do that. Rather than making a sculpture based on a stone, I was choosing a stone based on the form I had proposed. So that was an interesting twist for me. The city has been great to work with. We did change the location, but I kind of kept the scale. And what I did try and change a little bit was the base. So I kept the base a little smaller so that it would be approachable. And, I had, it was Chris Bennett, the engineer, was terrific. He did the footing, the frost-free footing, and Scott Holland and his team. And then of course, Cody Crane, with an 80-ton crane showed up at 9 o'clock in the morning, closed down the bridge. And that part of it was actually really sort of stressful, but like easy. For me, the harder part was having committed to something and then having to kind of come good on that of a scale that I hadn't done before. So it was straining everything I had. So. Right.
And I didn't know that this was your first that large scale installation. So we're thrilled that you saw us taking a chance and that we took a chance on you. So Andy, you had an army at the installation. I was there. It was fun to watch. It's been documented on video. We had 8, 10 folks from Public Works helping.
That sounds right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there are aspects of the project that just would not have been able to be pulled off without Public Works. And so Public Works was involved in terms of like actually citing the work in the locations that I chose. And I don't know, as an artist, you're sort of like always balancing this like dreamy attitude versus the practical. Like you want to be in full dreamy land and just envision an idea and have it materialize and do this thing. But it's the doing of the thing that actually makes it work. And so there was, I made 10 sculptures as a kind of like insurance policy. And I made them in a relatively short period of time. And I have worked with clay many times before, but this was a different kind of clay. And in some ways it's brick clay. And so it's less forgiving. So I had to like, I first off, generously got a literal ton of unfired bricks delivered to my house, which is where my studio is. And then I had to reconstitute the clay. It's called slaking. But then I worked with it and had to learn how to work with the clay. And then once I had made these 10 sculptures, take them back to Auburn to be fired in the brick factory. There was some back and forth as to, is this where we do it? Like the Foxes got put on a railroad car with, I don't know how many tons and thousands of bricks, but then rode through this process of firing that took about a week. And I think that was my bridge moment. Sort of like Hugh, it's like it was easy, relatively speaking. I'm not doing anything, but it was also nerve-wracking. Like, who knows what happens inside the kiln? It's this kind of thing. It was a lot of labor, I think is the way to describe this, but also like a lot of help. Like I got a lot of consultation and a lot of consultation with both the brick factory and help from Public Works. And I have a project manager who helps me organize and sort of like essentially determine what fire is most important to put out, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. That's the practical stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. And there was a crane involved and there's a whole thing about that, but like.
There is. But for those who are listening to understand more about our journey into a community that's going to use public art more and more around economic and community development, I think all of these layers of the conversation are very important. It does take a team, and our two cities have had some probably very extensive experience in a short period of time. Neither Andy's piece nor Hugh's were simple installations. They weren't, they were heavy, they were fragile, they were sited in a very specific way. And I want to commend our teams in Lewiston Auburn for A, giving us the permission to push the envelope, and B, being there literally all along the way to make it happen. As we develop our policy in our community, it's very important to note the number of areas of our cities that are involved in public art. Again, this is not choosing a painting for your own living room. This is siting, this is public property. This runs into ordinances around signage, historic preservation. It runs into planning our communities, our neighborhoods, where we want open space, where we want future development. Can things be moved? So it's very important as you develop public art policies to be attentive to all of those areas. And I think we've had probably some of the best experiences we could have while we're still moving through the early stages of long-term development. Hugh, you are part of a sculpture park, I believe, in Westbrook. Can you give us a little background on that?
Yeah, sure. So I sort of relate this back to the process, but with that particular piece, Westbrook Arts and Culture commissioned, or they didn't commission, they actually bought that piece. It was already made, and it was Cody Crane again who helped me install that piece. And they had initially decided they wanted to make a small sculpture garden in downtown Westbrook, actually right by the Taekwondo school there. And at the last minute, they decided to go for what was my largest piece at that point, which is about a 10-foot tall granite piece. And it's right near one of the oldest ginkgo trees in Maine, apparently. And they did a wonderful job. They had to re-landscape everything. And when they were in the process of landscaping, that was when, you know, Cody Crane was able to come in and set the piece. And yeah, it was a very, they were also, I feel like, in a very bold position where they were trying to move sort of quickly to get something established because of the ordinances that you were talking about. And they sort of wanted to have it in and have the grass growing so people would say, wow, this works, rather than go to the council members and say, could we do this? Or we're thinking about doing this, and have it kind of swatted back saying, we don't know what that is. So they were moving also relatively quickly. And as a sculptor, I think when you see that, when you have the stakeholders willing to dive in with you, it fuels you to kind of really give as much as you can, maybe go a little bit beyond what you normally might do. So I was excited about that. Yeah.
Good. Well, so my next two questions, go ahead, Andy.
I was just going to, just to sort of build on that idea, like, I think that I threw out what I felt like was a really ambitious idea. And to be given the green light on that is fantastic, right? Like, regardless of what a specific member of the public, like, if they like the piece or don't like the piece, there is this thing about like giving artists oxygen that really was what happened. And it felt really good also that it's like, it was my hometown, like that's my stomping ground. But to be given that sort of freedom, and then also to be working with people that are like excited about doing that thing and making that happen, was really just a fantastic experience in that way.
That's great. Well, both of your responses segue into the last set of questions we are going to do before we open it up to public questions. And I had them separate when we first thought about this, but I'm going to just let them combine together. And that is, Lewiston, Auburn, or other places you've worked, how do you see public art being very intentional around community development and around economic development? I know those things sometimes blend, but let's think about it from both perspectives. You have worked now in Lewiston, Auburn, and Hugh, maybe your upcoming work in the neighborhood work with the choice could be an example of that. But let's think about your experiences around public art having an impact on economic development and community development. Andy, do you want to start? You impacted tourism in Portland significantly with one of your pieces.
I think my answer to that is also like, I didn't set out to impact tourism. I didn't set out to, I set out to engage the community in some way, right? Like, I think a lot of my work that I'm interested in doing is I'm thinking about it taking place outside of a gallery or museum situation. I want to engage the public in a conversation about like the world, and the best place to do that is like outside of an institution for me. Like, I'm not putting down institutions, but that's where I gravitate. So I made this piece in 2015 through a grant from Space Gallery. It's called the Kindling Fund grant. It was a small little grant, relatively speaking, that I was able to kind of snowball by getting initially like business buy-in. People liked the idea, and they said, yeah, I can give you some hardware for that project. And that was one of my first sort of inklings of like, oh, this is kind of engaging with the community in a way. It's like, I want to do this weird thing. And the weird thing was basically this, like, I wanted to rebuild or partially rebuild an old pier in the east end of Portland and place what are essentially kind of faux taxidermy wolf dog like things on it. It was a it was based on an experience that I had of being on a ferry heading to Peaks Island and seeing a bunch of dogs waiting for their people to return from Portland. And I just had this sort of envisioning that was like, how long would it take before those dogs like stopped waiting, basically? And so I got to recreate that. So I got this permission to do this weird thing. It was a public sculpture, but it was temporary public sculpture. And then it turned out that the location was this kind of sweet spot it was an undeveloped area, but you could access it by boat. It was at the edge of an old parking lot, or a usable parking lot, but it was so you could drive right up. So it became, it was also near the East End like walkway trail. I forget exactly what that's called, but so you could walk there, you could bike there, you could get off the ferry and walk to this thing, or you could kayak to it. And it just became this thing where a lot of people went to it, and a lot of people could just like pull up and park, or take an interesting way to see it. And that for me was like, oh, this is like I didn't expect it, but it was like, this is also how you engage with the public in a way that creates organic conversations about whatever it was that I was trying to do, but also just about like happening upon public artwork, and like the unique placement of it, or less predictable placement of it.
Great. Hugh, have you spent any time thinking about how public art has an impact on community development or economic development?
Well, I like to think about the public art that I like, not my own work, but other people's work, and how that has impacted my moving through a space where I like a sculpture. And it has a great resonance, and it echoes around the place it's in. And like I say, I'm not saying that about my work, but to me, you're sort of interested, you're fascinated, you kind of want to walk around it, and it's changed the whole area. And so that's the kind of ideal. My own work, I don't know. So that's my ideal. Whether or not my work fulfills that or not, I don't know. I had to take some photos for Scott Holland at the Westbrook, the Auburn City Works, to show how Westbrook was sited, and the grass was all torn up around the sculpture because people were sitting at the base of the sculpture. They might just be eating ice creams, but I'll take it. They're leaning up against the sculpture. I'll take it. But so there you go.
And you've applied and been awarded a commission to be part of the Choice Neighborhood Grant, which, as folks locally know, is our HUD funded grant. It's the funding for the public art pieces is actually part of the planning grant, not the larger grant that has also been received. But the neighborhood is getting 6 new sculptures, and Hugh's will be one of them. And I believe, Hugh, you met with some of the residents in terms of planning. Any insight as to how public art may transform that neighborhood?
Well, I think that it's sort of a fine line, because I'm coming in from outside to put a big, relatively big piece of stone in their community, and they're not the people I was talking to aren't necessarily asking me to do that. It's the committee, and so there's an introduction, and hopefully I did take some feedback from the folks that were there. And I'm hoping that there is a understanding that this is attempting to enhance their experience, not basically some snooty artist that's putting artwork into their park or their community.
Right. Well, we know that public art is a lot more than just static, interesting things to look at. We know it builds community. We know it certainly engages folks. As you said, dialogue can be positive, it can be challenging, it can be, but the fact that people are talking about it means they're looking at it and experiencing it. It can attract tourism, it can promote arts and culture in general. It can encourage business development. Those are all things that have been documented in many policies, in many experiences across our country. But I think what I'm learning from being part of this whole process is that it has to be very much It has to be layered into the community's way of doing business, right? As you've just so clearly said, someone coming in from the outside and prescribing something is not maybe the best way to do it. So we're trying, and I hope there'll be some questions from the audience to learn more about what we're doing to start to make this a very engaged process. The community, the original grant is the grant period, the CCED grant is done, and it's time to move to the next level. So we're looking for more and more input into how our community will develop public art going forward. In the meantime, there's lots of things to see. LA Arts and their wonderful art walks will be celebrating our current installations in either the May or June art walk. We'll be publicizing that widely. They've taken on a leadership role in helping move the process forward, continuing to use the cultural plan as their guide. But we also know we have Thomas Berger's Fish that's down in Anniversary Park in Auburn. Charlie Hewitt has installed Rattle and Hum. He has Hopeful, and he has some other things coming along into Lewiston Auburn. We were fortunate to be the state within New England and then the community within the state to receive the National Endowment of the Arts mural installation to honor the centennial of women's suffrage. That's in Dufresne Plaza in Lewiston. And we talked about Choice Neighborhood. We have a lot coming along, and we have some wonderful private development. The Downtown Lewiston Association put a mural on the building on Main Street this summer, and we've already had murals on some of our parking garages. There's too many to list here in this conversation, which I think is the best part of our story in Lewiston Auburn, that we are Maine's newest canvas for public art, and we're trying to be very thoughtful. We're trying to follow best practice. We're trying to listen to artists who are, as we've just heard, a very important part of the equation, and that artists engage, and that's part of their natural inquisitiveness and their natural way of doing work. They ask questions, and they're creative problem solvers, and so I think that is no more apparent than in public art. When you hit some speed bumps, as you both, and I was with you on most of those speed bumps. So when you hit those speed bumps, you didn't say, oh, we can't do this. You said, we'll find a way to figure it out. And I think that's what's the most exciting part for me about public art, is that literally as a member of the public, I can be involved. So mark your calendars to watch for Art Walk May or June. LA Arts will be publicizing that widely. We hope to have a really wonderful evening of activating every site, not just our new sites, but all of our sites of public art in Lewiston Auburn, and getting folks around. And hopefully our artists will be with us to welcome people to their pieces when they find them in our community, using the great map we have. You can find on the LA Arts and the city's websites. So with that, I'm going to open it to the audience questions, and I think Marcella will help us organize that. Thank you.
Hello. So just as a reminder to the audience, you can type in any questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, or on Facebook in the comment box. We have a question here. What do you think are the best ways for the cities and their arts organizations to promote conversation around the public artworks that you've created for us?
I'll start, and then I'm going to ask Hugh and Andy to both answer as well. I mean, I do believe that we need to talk about it as much as we possibly can. I think today's a great start to have public forums. I think I'm thrilled that we've had a lot of attention by the media. They've covered everything we've done. I think we need to layer into installations opportunities to both celebrate, reflect, and continue to talk. And my last thing I'll say is we have to engage our youth. I can't imagine this not somehow starting to integrate with our school systems. I think it's very important that we start to think about all of this work. I mean, how it's made, the materials. Think of the two stories we've just heard about, just the two pieces that Andy and Hugh have described around the history, the materials, the craft, the technical skills, all of the pieces of making art that are beyond just the object when it's finished. So Andy, Hugh?
I think I don't fully know yet how to answer that question, except like like how do you promote this, or how do you have this conversation? I feel like my approach is more from a little bit further away or something. Like I do it with my teaching. I'm engaging with my students about the value and function of art in society, but also their local area. Like, I think to go all the way back to the skateboarding thing, it's like to see your environment as a creative or potentially creative space, whatever that means to you. And so I think the other aspect of that for me is like, I need to understand the space. It was perfect that it was Lewiston Auburn because I knew the space and I got to explore it in greater detail. And then I can operate out from there as the sort of designer of the idea. It's harder for me to have an idea and not have it cited already, kind of thing, if that makes sense. So in terms of like promote the conversation, I feel like, I don't know, like you go see the work and then you have a conversation with the artist or something like that, like directly. Like I at the site, I got, for the Unpack piece in 2015, no one knew that I was the artist, so I could just show up and watch people and listen, like a bit like a fly on the wall, like to hear their questions about the work, to hear their judgments, to hear it all. And I think I engaged with some people and said, like, I actually made that, like where it felt like appropriate or like that I wouldn't be invasive or something. But like, I think for me, it's always about that kind of one-on-one or immediate experience.
You?
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to sort of creep up on your audience. You don't want to beat them over the head. You want them to creep up on what you're doing.
Yeah.
But I always feel when I see the UPS guy take a minute to try and look around a piece I'm working on, I know I'm onto something.
Yeah.
I'm all the way up here in Cherryfield, so I only have one UPS guy, and he doesn't come by very often. So when I get sort of negative feedback from people, I sort of say, well, geez, take a piece of plaster and try and make an object that's interesting out of that piece of plaster. I mean, that's a question for our students. Like, sculpture's not as easy. Criticizing is very easy. Actually making the work is not as easy. So we really want the feedback, but we are also engaged in basically 25 years of trying to make good sculpture. So having feedback from people who haven't been doing that, you have to take it with a little bit of a pinch of salt, if that makes sense.
I also think just like for a direct answer about the Ledger's work, for example, it's like maybe it's a conversation about what other spaces you as the viewer would want to see activated.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like part of what I want to do is activate a space or leave some room for development around that space, for a bench to go there, for something like that. That kind of conversation would be fun, basically. Yeah.
Great. Do we have other questions, Marcella?
Yes. What is your view of the field of public artists in Maine? That's for anyone.
So you folks are part of a community of artists in Maine. We are very fortunate as a state. I don't know if people realize in general how fortunate we are to have the caliber of artists making work in our state. But what are your thoughts about the field of public artists?
For me, it's the variety. I mean, the variety is unbelievable. It's just the different type of work, my work to Andy's work to the other 5 people that are part of the Lewiston, the choice neighborhoods. The variety is sort of unbelievable. I mean, it's to be celebrated, I think. So,
Andy?
I don't have one. I just it's kind of like, I just see everybody that is making art right now that I feel like are contemporaries of myself in Maine, it's like we're all trying to push the wheel of creative engagement and making a living at the same time. And public art is one thing. Like, I don't even know that I would consider myself a public sculpture artist yet. Like, I just don't, like sometimes my ideas just happen in the woods with battery operated motors and clocks and stuff like that. Like it's not just, like, I'm just always trying to engage, I think is the thing. And it's like, either I'm not a public artist sculpture or I always am, I guess. But I don't know about everybody else in that regard.
I'm gonna riff off the question a little bit, and I apologize if it takes in a direction the person who asked it wasn't intending, but I'd love to just quickly, rapid fire, Lewiston Auburn, those of us who live here because we love this community and we want this community to thrive and grow and be patient and attentive to its history, and yet very futuristic in its thinking. That's a tall order. Tell us what artists love in a community to make it their home. I can't take you off your blueberry barrens. I get that, Hugh. I'm not, trying to make you move here. And Andy, I know you grew up here, but just what elements of a community make an artist say, wow, that's a great place to live?
I could tell you what drew me to Cherryfield, and that partly is that you're kind of left alone just to a large degree, and it's not that expensive to live here, and there's a long winter, and you're kind of left alone.
Andy, does that dovetail with your being in the woods by yourself?
No, that's different. I was just thinking about, like, it's not Maine, but on my honeymoon nearly 20 years ago, I went to a town in Nova Scotia called Lunenburg, and on the street was a soap shop, and they had bubbles coming out of the storefront, and there was something so inviting about that goofiness. And I think I like a place that feels warm. I think, like, socially warm, open to engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's partially what I do as an artist. It's like I'm looking to sort of like add color to the world, and I feel like I'm looking for places that are open to that, if that makes sense.
I think so. Marcella, I think we have time for one or two more questions.
Sure. So we have somebody asking if they can see pictures of the subject sculptures. So maybe a suggestion of how people can view these online if they're not able to visit them in person.
Well, if your moderator were more technically savvy, she would have her slideshow up, and she has one, but she's afraid she may not do it well. So I'm going to suggest that you folks can visit LA Arts, and I know they have on their social media lots of they have the map that I referenced, and those all pop-up photos. You may go to both cities' websites and Facebook pages, and I believe LA Arts Facebook page as well has a lot of social media on the most recent installations. But we want very much to have a visual place where people, and I'm quite sure that the trail is where you'll find the best images of each local piece. And if I can't, maybe while I already said I wasn't gonna do the slideshow, so I won't. But if you're not local, whoever's asking the questions, my contact information is on my website, RSC Consulting, and I would take you to lunch and take you on a tour.
That's nice. I also have an Instagram. I'm at Andy Rosen Artworks on Instagram. So the foxes are on there. The ledgers piece is on there. And I have a website as well, which is, I think you can link to it through the Instagram.
So I think we have time for this one. What are your thoughts about public censure and demands for removal of art?
Interesting. Well, I'll let either artist answer. We do know that good policies included a de-accessioning, relocation and de-accessioning policy. Some of them speak to that issue, and so they are areas of concern that we have to think through. We know in Portland there was a de-accession piece about a decade ago because of public. It wasn't censure in the sense that it was something that people felt was vulgar or insensitive. It just was not fitting in their mind into the area it was put in. So it happens. Artists, what do you think?
Hugh, are you going to say something?
Well, I'm basically just going to say that at this point, I think I am working so hard to produce the work that it's hard to know that there is okay, we're done. Could you come and collect it at the other side of that? But there is, and that is a city evolving and changing and wanting different work. And we have to pay attention to that. But there's so much effort into going into actually getting to the start line and then the finish line that it's less fun to think about the bring it home part.
I think I was thinking about two pieces. One, I can't remember what that piece was called in Portland. That
Tracing the four, or yeah,
exactly. That to me seemed a little absurd. Like from what I remember, it being just kind of, it wasn't that good looking or something like that. And I feel like that's obviously opinion, but like that might have been poor planning. I don't really know, but I feel like you are taking a chance in some way on an artist, on an aesthetic, on time, on an investment over time. And I think that's why I was like so excited to be awarded the project. It's an investment in the artist. I suspect that if you are engaged with the community and listening to the community in the same way that like Hugh is part of like a forum that is like discussing his proposal and his work going somewhere, it's like, I feel like if you're actually listening, those issues probably aren't gonna come up.
Well, I think it goes back to the question about how we engage in the conversation, and the more community involvement we have in the conversation, the more people that can be participants in this the working group that will continue to evolve to help the community put pieces together. There's going to be some opportunity on a couple of the pieces in the choice neighborhood. I think LA Arts could help you hear more about this, where there's some selection still to happen within the artist who's been commissioned to do a piece, some voting. And I think I'm going to repeat again, I think our K-12, we as a community have an obligation in my mind to get our kids more involved. And so as I stay involved in this work, that's my next goal, is to try to figure out how our school systems can have kids feel empowered, that their community is creative and it's a great place to live, and they have some role in thinking what that looks like for the future. And there's great models out there in the country where we can start to do some kinds of installations that may be temporary, or in places that will evolve over time, where kids can really have some agency to do a lot of the work. So I feel we are on a path, and we are still looking toward the horizon. And but I'm very pleased for our cities to be where we are today. And 5 years ago, I don't know. I'd love to hear from LA Arts, maybe out in the community. Did they think we'd get this far? So thank you, everyone, for attending today. Thank you to Andy Rosen, artist from South Portland, Maine, Auburn native, Edward Little graduate, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And Hugh Lassen, a new friend from Cherryfield, Maine, and someone whose blueberries I hope you can buy. And his sculpture.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
want to also thank the audience. We have a bunch of questions that we unfortunately couldn't get to. I do want to highlight one, though. We have in the audience, along with Beckie, the other co-chair of the Public Art Working Group, Darby Ray, and she's echoing something that you actually just touched on, Beckie, that the audience members should know that as part of the Choice Neighborhoods new round of public art, the public can help choose a few things about the new art that's going in. So choose between 2 sculptures, and then for another, they can vote for the colors of 3 sculptures that are going in. And that is going to be happening at the grand opening of the new sledding hill on Bartlett Street on Saturday, February 12th from 1 to 4. So in case anybody's interested in attending, I want to make sure that's put out there. And again, thank you very much to all of our artists. Thank you to Beckie for all your work on this. And thank you to everyone for attending. We're very happy you came today.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.